What's up guys, Sean here, and today we're going to talk about an encounter between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders that happened in the most recent Democratic presidential debate. But before we get started, if you're wondering what you should be doing in the lead up to the Democratic National Convention where they will be nominating a presidential candidate, wonder no more, because in Milwaukee, just before the convention is being held, I will be doing a panel at the Better Discourse event, which is an event being put together by Mythicists, or Myth-Informed, the Myth People. I know it sounds like I'm doing the same joke that I did in my previous video, but in reality, I intended on looking up what their organization is actually called, and then I just forgot. But regardless, you guys should definitely come out to the event if you can. The link to the tickets will be in the description box of the video. You can meet me, see my panel, meet a bunch of other content creators, and hang out with us in the after party. Sounds amazing. I would definitely do it if I were you. In fact, I will do it. I will clone myself and have one of my own clones be in the audience to enjoy this, not only as a speaker and a panelist, but as somebody who is enjoying this as a fan. That's how much I'm excited about this. But now that we got all that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the thing that I absolutely didn't want to talk about, and that's the Des Moines Register CNN Democratic debate, the last debate before the Iowa caucus, where Elizabeth Warren decided that it was a good idea to shiv Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders failed to defend himself adequately. Now, the reason I didn't think I'd be making a video about this debate is because the Democratic debates this election cycle have been incredibly boring. Except for that one time where Kamala Harris decided to take a really cheap shot at Joe Biden, nothing that interesting has been happening in them, and that's been a formatting issue when they had too many candidates and they decided to split them up into two different debates, but they didn't do like a tier list for the debates. They randomly sorted them because Democrats don't believe in merit, so they're like, I guess we'll put some people over there and put some people over here, and you never see the people that you actually want to debate against each other, because this is how the Democratic National Convention decides to run their debates, because they're incompetent. And of course, there's the lack of compelling content. Every time a Democratic debate was on the cusp of actually being interesting, somebody in the debate would say, whoa, this is exactly what Donald Trump wants. We shouldn't be fighting amongst ourselves, even though the entire point of an inter-party debate is to fight amongst yourselves to pick the best candidate. Seriously, I've been watching these debates deeply anticipating another Chris Christie, Marco Rubio political murder-suicide maneuver, and I'm just not getting it, and that's why I didn't think I'd be talking about this. But then Elizabeth Warren decided that she was going to start laying the ground for an incredibly shady attack against Bernie Sanders. And that attack was that in a private meeting that those two had prior to the election, Bernie Sanders made the awful and downright sexist comment that a woman could not be president of the United States. Now look, we here at the Actual Justice Warrior are not fans of Bernard McSanderson. And I can say that with absolute confidence because this is a one-person operation, and I personally do not like Bernard McSanderson. In fact, I tend to play clips of him embracing communist dictators because that should matter, however, it doesn't matter at all, and I find that incredibly frustrating.
I think it's also fair to point out that when we were in Moscow, for example, I think most of the people here also were extremely impressed by their public transportation system. The stations themselves were absolutely beautiful, including many works of art, chandeliers that were beautiful. It was a very, very effective system. Also, I was impressed by the youth programs that they have, their palaces of culture for the young people, a whole variety of programs for young people, and cultural programs which go far beyond what we do in this country. We went to a theater in Yaroslavl, which was absolutely beautiful, had 3 separate stages where cultural programs are put on by professional actors and actresses, including a puppeteer area.
However, there's about a 0% chance that Bernie Sanders said this. Now, this should be surprising to none of you because if you watch my last video where I break down who I think are the remaining 4 relevant candidates in the Democratic primary, the entire Elizabeth Warren section was dedicated to me pointing out all the examples of Elizabeth Warren lying about absolutely everything when it became convenient for her to lie about said thing. I touched on the Native American thing. I touched on Elizabeth Warren claiming that she was fired for being pregnant, despite the fact that the transcript showed that they actually offered her the job back. I also talked about her lying about what her father's job, downgrading his position to make herself seem like she had more middle-class roots than she actually did. And I didn't even delve too deep into the whole Native American thing. Elizabeth Warren didn't just say she was Native American once. She filled out paperwork when she was applying for jobs and all sorts of positions, claiming that she was Native American, and all those positions tended to have a diversity wing that was looking for people that were non-white. Now, a bunch of left-wing news outlets that coincidentally also backed Elizabeth Warren's Senate campaign will tell you that there's absolutely no evidence that Elizabeth Warren received any special treatment based on the fact that she was constantly telling everybody that she was Native American. And even the insinuation that her being hired at Harvard and being promoted as the first Native American woman to be hired to be a law professor at Harvard in a time when Harvard was dealing with a lawsuit related to discrimination in their hiring practices, that's complete malarkey, as Joe Biden would say, and an outright conspiracy theory. But all joking aside, Elizabeth Warren, obvious liar, completely dishonest political actor, all the lies that she tells, coincidentally, are lies that happen to benefit her in that situation, or lies that she perceives will benefit her in any given situation. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Sean, if Elizabeth Warren always lies when it's politically advantageous to herself, or professionally advantageous to herself, then what is the advantage that she's gaining from depicting Bernard McSanderson as an evil sexist? And I'd respond to that question by saying, get out of my brain, fictitious person that I just made up to ask me that question so I could answer it. And then I'd say, did you not watch the 2016 Democratic presidential campaign? This was Hillary Clinton's go-to move against Bernard McSanderson throughout the whole campaign. She painted Bernie as a sexist. She painted Bernie supporters as a sexist. The whole Bernie Bros meme came from Hillary Clinton because she wanted to play the woman card.
If fighting for women's health care is playing the woman card, then deal me in.
This isn't anything new, and in fact, the mainstream media have been setting Elizabeth Warren up to play this card throughout the entire campaign. There's a bunch of sound bites on all the major left-wing networks that basically say that if you are progressive and you support Bernard McSanderson over Elizabeth Warren, because they're allegedly identical in policy, the only distinction that one could be making is that Elizabeth Warren is a woman and Bernard McSanderson is a man, and therefore Bernie supporters are sexist, because that's the only reason you would choose Bernard McSanderson over the tribe of Warren.
There's a ceiling. There is nowhere to go, but there is no up to go. And all of those support, I actually overheard someone saying that I thought was an interesting point, that basically at this point, if you are still supporting Sanders as opposed to Warren, it's kind of showing your sexism because she has more detailed plans and her plans have evolved. I thought it was an interesting point, and I think there may be something to it.
Now, up until very recently, Elizabeth Warren has decided to not go this route in attacking Bernie Sanders because she hasn't needed to. Elizabeth Warren has been consistently ahead of Bernie Sanders, and because there's a perception that Hillary Clinton might have lost a bunch of voters that supported Bernie Sanders because of the way that she treated Bernie Sanders, you can understand why Elizabeth Warren would be tepid in attacking Bernie Sanders, especially when she doesn't have to. However, Elizabeth Warren has been dipping in the polls, and as explained in my previous video, it appears that all the moderates are coalescing around Joe Biden, and the progressives in response are deciding to align themselves with Bernie Sanders. So now that Bernie Sanders is holding a significant portion of Elizabeth Warren's base, or what she perceived to be her base prior to this new alignment in the polls, it became advantageous for her to attack Bernie Sanders, and that's exactly what she did. It started with her campaign leaking about how Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren had this private meeting at the start of the campaign, and for some odd reason, randomly in the campaign, Bernie Sanders just said, well, America will never elect a woman, or a woman could never be the president, or some such thing. Now, there's a 99% chance that Bernie Sanders did not say this, and if that 1% is true, and he did say this, then Elizabeth Warren is a bad person for only bringing this up when her poll numbers are dipping and she thinks it will advantage her politically. But Bernie Sanders is the same exact guy who encouraged Elizabeth Warren to run in 2015 rather than himself. So at one point in Bernie Sanders' life, he actually thought that Elizabeth Warren was more electable than Bernie Sanders himself. I mean, think about it logically. Bernie and Elizabeth Warren were the only two people present at this meeting. All of the Warren staffers that came forward heard this secondhand from Elizabeth Warren. And in fact, this is a meeting that has been reported on previously in the media. This is the meeting where allegedly Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders decided that even though they're going to be running against each other, they're not going to attack each other, especially on the debate stage. So the idea that we haven't heard about this meeting before and we're just hearing about this damning part of it now, when presumably Elizabeth Warren would have left the meeting and told these key staffers what Bernie said months ago or a year ago when this meeting actually took place, and it would only come out now when it's advantage Warren, or when it's perceived to be an advantage for Warren when she happens to be falling off in the polls, doesn't make any sense. Again, can't stand Bernie Sanders, but come on, this is obviously a very cynical political maneuver on behalf of the Warren campaign. And the proof of that is that on the debate stage, Elizabeth Warren already had a rah-rah go women prepared answer to take down Bernie Sanders and make herself look good. She had an answer meant to slay the monster that she created. This is an obvious political strategy. You put out something negative about yourself, so then it gets brought up in the debate so you can have the big soundbite moment where you take down that negative thing that nobody ever said against you because women power or minority power or whatever kind of power you're trying to put forward in order to make yourself look good.
But look, this question about whether or not a woman can be president has been raised, and it's time for us to attack it head on. And I think the best way to talk about who can win is by looking at people's winning record. So, can a woman beat Donald Trump? Look at the men on this stage. Collectively, they have lost 10 elections. The only people on this stage who have won every single election that they've been in are the women, Amy and me.
Now, politically, I don't think this is going to work out well for Elizabeth Warren. She came off, in my opinion, as an incredibly cynical actor. These remarks felt overly prepared, and one of the things that made these remarks feel overly prepared is that she timed the timeline of when somebody beat a Republican and that became a relevant thing to almost exactly when Bernie Sanders beat his Republican opponent to win his seat in Congress.
And the only person on this stage who has beaten an incumbent Republican any time in the past 30 years is me.
In my opinion, Warren is going to lose a lot more of the progressive base because she decided to use this line of attack against the other progressive on the stage than she will gain from playing the woman card and getting some of those sympathy victim votes. But just because Warren loses in this moment in the grand scheme of things does not mean that Bernie Sanders won this exchange. In fact, Bernie, in my opinion, came off insanely weak. So we have an instance where it's the weak versus the cynical, and I'll give you an example of what I mean by Bernie coming off incredibly weak.
Well, as a matter of fact, I didn't say it. And I don't want to waste a whole lot of time on this because this is what Donald Trump and maybe some of the media want. Anybody knows me, knows that it's incomprehensible that I would think that a woman could not be president of the United States. Go to YouTube today. There's some video of me 30 years ago talking about how a woman could become president of the United States. In 2015, I deferred, in fact, to Senator Warren. There was a movement to draft Senator Warren to run for president. And you know what? I stayed back. Senator Warren decided not to run, and I did run afterwards. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million votes. How could anybody in a million years not believe that a woman could become president of the United States?
So he gives his answer, rah-rah women, rah-rah Hillary Clinton, popular vote, even though that doesn't matter. And then he closes out with this denial.
So Senator Sanders, I do want to be clear here. You're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
However, right after Bernie Sanders closes out with a denial, the very next question, seconds later, literally on the heels of, presumes that Bernie Sanders said this and completely ignores his denial. And Bernie does not readdress this situation. He doesn't go after the moderator for their framing of the next question. He doesn't do anything. He just kind of lets it slip by. And in fact, Warren calls him a liar right after he says he didn't say it without actually calling him a liar by saying that he did in fact say it.
So Senator Sanders, I do want to be clear here. You're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
Senator Warren, what did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman could not win the election?
I disagreed. Bernie is my friend, and I am not here to try to fight with Bernie. But look, this question about whether or not a woman can be president has been raised, and it's time for us to attack it.
If you're Bernie Sanders in that situation, or any politician on a debate stage, and another candidate slaps you right across the face, you have to get right back in there. If a moderator disrespects you like that by immediately assuming that what you just said, your denial, doesn't matter and frames the next question as if your denial never happened, you have to get back in there and call it out. But what Bernie does is the worst possible thing you could do. First, when he does get a chance to answer, he ignores the fact that people called him a liar and people assumed what he said was false. But before that, he lets the moderator kick it from Elizabeth Warren over to Amy Klobuchar.
That is why I'm going to win.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you.
Now, the way the debates work is when somebody mentions your name in a negative way, you get time to respond. Now, Klobuchar was mentioned by Warren, but it was in a complimentary way. Bernie was mentioned also by Warren, but in a disparaging way. If you're Bernie Sanders, you can't let them kick it from Warren over to Klobuchar, because by the time it gets back to you, even if you go back to attacking Warren, it doesn't seem as direct. You can't make that direct connection. Normally, Bernie has no problem raising his hand when he actually wants to engage in the conversation, but here he just lets the thing blow by him, and by the time he gives his response, it's barely connected and does not directly address the people calling him a liar right before this. Come on, Bernie, you came off as incredibly weak here. That's why I say that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren did not win in this exchange. In fact, they muddied each other up, making the real winner of this exchange Joe Biden, because he had no involvement in this exchange. And I know this is going to sound really strange to a lot of you, but for me, the big winner of this debate is Joe Biden, because Biden came into the debate in the lead. Nobody really landed a hit on Biden. Sure, he couldn't complete a sentence for the first 11 answers that he gave, but he wasn't damaged through this debate. 3 of the candidates, the ones that I said were irrelevant in my last video, didn't show up, and the 2 candidates that should be competing with Joe Biden, the 2 candidates that should be attacking Joe Biden from his left, ended up fighting each other and muddying each other up rather than hitting Biden. This is the last debate before the Iowa caucus. Biden is up nationally by 9 points in the polls, and he appears to be in some of the polls in the lead, and if not, a very close second in the Iowa caucus polls. What are you doing? You have to attack this guy. You both had one job, and it was to attack Joe Biden, and instead you ended up slapping each other. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. Follow me on the social medias. If you want to support me, PayPal, Venmo, Patreon, Teespring store, and Subscribestar. This has been me talking about Elizabeth Warren shivving Bernie in the back. Till next time.